listening to the Straight to Video podcast with Rob Lane.
What is up? Welcome along to a new episode of my show, Straight to Video, wherever you're listening from. Today's episode is a cool one for a number of reasons. Not only has my guest Tim Quinn had the most extraordinary of careers, which I'll get to in a second, but we met and hooked this up in kind of an unexpected way. As some of you know, I regularly attend Comic Cons with my other interest called Arcade Frames, and a week or so ago I was at Liverpool Comic Con, which was a super fun weekend. Now, a lot of times when you have a table at one of these events, you have no idea where you're going to be situated. But luckily for me, I ended up sat right next to today's guest, Tim, who was promoting his brand new book, Confessions of a Superhero, which is part of a series of graphic books released by a great company and record label called Mooching About. And the book about Tim's life has been put together by the artist enchanted, who was at the event too, and it was super cool to meet both her and Tim over the event. So where does the superhero in the book's title come into play? Well, Tim for many years has worked in comic books, from being a fan as a young boy in Liverpool to getting the chance to work for two of this country's biggest firms, DC Thompson and IPC, who produced all the biggest titles, from The Dandy and Beano through to Eagle and Battle. And then from there, Tim would begin to work at Marvel Comics, both here and in the USA, working with Stan Lee himself. But to be honest, that is just the tiniest part of his amazing story, which you're about to hear. And to be honest, when I thought it would be great to have Tim on the show, I had no idea about everything that made up his journey, so it was amazing to hear, and I barely scraped the surface. What we do learn, though, is that many of the huge events in Tim's life are based around chance meetings, or as we call it, sliding doors. It really is quite extraordinary, but it also reinforces the age-old rule that says luck is really all about when preparation meets opportunity. Before we get into our chat, please continue to show support for our friends Dead Skull Coffee, who are a great rock and roll coffee business based in Croydon, who produce some of the finest ground or full bean coffee you're likely to find. And as a listener to this show, you can grab 15% off any purchase over at deadskullcoffee.co.uk by simply adding the discount code STV on checkout. And I also want to thank everyone who continues to support this show on the Straight to Video Patreon page. There's a bunch of great people in this fun little community we have who get early heads up on guests, a bonus podcast, and also exclusive merchandise you will not find anywhere else. If you too would like to get involved, then please visit patreon.com/STVpod for all the information. Alright, Tim's new book, Confessions of a Superhero, which has been released by Mooching About and written and designed by enchanted, is available through the Mooching About Bandcamp page at bandcamp.com, and just simply search Mooching About. And if you'd like to learn more about Tim, then you can find him over at mightyquinnmanagement.com. But for now, to give you just a tiny introduction into all the amazing things he's done, please enjoy my straight to video chat with Tim Quinn. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. Is it really a week ago? Who would have thought?
I know. Have you recovered?
I am recovered, yes. We did surprisingly well because it's always dodgy when you have a book released about yourself. You don't think anybody's likely to buy it. And it was pretty much from the start there, we were selling, which was great. And of course, you know, they were lovely people. So it was a fun event.
How cool is it for you to see those like young kids? Because they were like enamored when you started telling them stories.
I know. Yeah. Well, particularly after the last, couple of years with COVID, to actually come out and actually see more than two people gathered in one place was amazing enough and quite uplifting. But to see that any of them had, the feeling that I have for those wonderful places I've been lucky enough to work was fantastic. So, it was a lot of fun. And it was my first real meeting with Eamon since, we started talking about the book.
How long's that book been in construction?
Well, 68 years, really.
Well, yeah.
A little did I know she was taking notes through that time. To be honest, I'm not sure because I've lost all track of time.
Everybody has.
So it seems like something she mentioned a while back. And after an initial doubt about the whole project, I said, yes, okay, let's do it. boy, am I glad I did, because she's done such a great job on it. I mean, it's an astonishing book, and I feel I can say that without being too big-headed about it.
Well, yeah, because I guess you can almost detach from it because she's put her own artistic element into it and vision on it.
Exactly, and it's one of a series, so I'm able to look at the other books she's done in this series and see, just what a fabulous artistic world she comes from and creates within. So, I feel very chuffed.
Thank you for doing this for us. I appreciate you being up for it. How are you for time, Tim? Are you good for like 45 minutes?
I've got till I drop. We don't know at this age. It's all borrowed time. So if I suddenly keel over...
Don't do that.
I'm looking at the background there, and it looks a much better background than I've managed to fix up myself.
Oh, I like yours. Yours is great.
There's more rhyme and reason to yours, I think. Mine is a hodgepodge of an explosion of bits and bobs from my life.
That's pretty much mine as well. I've got music and films and all kinds of stuff. So this is actually the bedroom I grew up in.
No kidding.
Yeah, my mum moved away from me.
Oh, really? Well, I was lucky enough to grow up in a wonderful bedroom that the whole house cost £2,000 back in 1956. And I've seen that it's just gone on the market again for £1,750,000. If only my father had kept the bloody thing, I would be laughing today.
So is that in Crosby in Liverpool?
That was in Crosby, in a place called Blundell Sands, which is a suburb. Well, Crosby's a suburb of Liverpool and Blundell Sands is a suburb of Crosby. Yeah, a very happy place to grow up in.
Was it always about comic books from a young age, or did music and sport play a big part? Because they're kind of synonymous with Liverpool as well.
Yeah, right. Do I look as if I've ever done anything to do with sports?
I don't know. You had a pretty rocking look back in the day with the long black hair. Very 80s football look back in the day.
I have run across a sports field, but it was purely to play truant from our school. So I ran like the clappers across our sports field to leap over a wall and spend happier days than they would have been if I'd been stuck at school. Was it always comics? Well, my very earliest memory is of drawing a comic strip. And I was 2 3/4 years of age at that time. And it's interesting that my memories click in with doing that. But it was a comic strip that I drew on my bedroom wall.
How did that go down?
It went down very well. It was actually my mother's idea. She said, here's a stick of charcoal, go and draw on your bedroom wall. And I was lucky enough at that age to actually draw a character that looked like something that was recognizable, not only to me, but to other people. So that gave me a belief in what I could do. And I immediately wanted to tell stories about that character. And I was smart enough to know these stories had better be really simple. Just because I can draw a hedgehog doesn't mean I can draw everything else. So they were simplistic, but that's a great way to learn to tell stories in pictures.
Yeah, it's always like the simple approach in a way. Don't try and be too clever. Almost like I'm not a songwriter, but I know keep it simple and they're the things which will resonate with people.
Something of the Beano tapestry about it, which has a beautiful simplicity to it. Not that I knew about the Beano tapestry back when I was 2 3/4, but I guess it was out there. So that's how it started. So yeah, comics were already a part of my life before I could read, because I have an elder brother and he is 5 years older than me. So he was already getting comics and reading comics. And I was looking at the pictures in them and being blown away. And back then there were lots and lots and lots of weekly comics in Britain. So there was such a variety of styles of storytelling in their pages. The comics, most of them were about 16 pages in length. You got 16 different ways of telling a story in that comic, and different types of story, from outer space to set at an old school to deep under the ocean to somewhere in history, a Western, because Westerns were big in the 50s. And it was an exciting world to discover, and it made me want to read instantly, just because I wanted to know the full story behind the pictures, But there were some extraordinary artists, illustrators around at that time. So it was already pulling me in way before I could read.
I find this interesting. Didn't you get some first-hand experience and exposure with American culture from a very early age, because you're able to go to a nearby airbase?
That's right. Well, we lived in a big house. My dad had bought this big old Victorian house, and we let the top floor, to make ends meet, because Dad had bought the house because Mum had fallen in love with it. He couldn't afford it, even though it only cost, what seems like not a lot now. £2,000 back in 1956 was a hell of a lot of money. And so to try and make ends meet, they let the top floor of our house to this American family who were over because the husband works on the US Air Force Base in Liverpool, which was at a place called Burton Wood. And we became really close friends with this couple who were wonderful, beautiful. I mean, I'm still in touch with their daughter to this day.
Whereabouts in America was they from?
They were from New York, ended up in North Carolina. And so it was there was a real glamour to them. Back then, America was this incredibly glamorous place of Hollywood and Westerns and superheroes, as I found out by going to my brother and I were invited onto the Air Force Base, and we went into the PX there, which is the sort of general store, and found racks of these wonderful American comics. They were all the current date. These were, very difficult to get anywhere outside of the Air Force Base. I mean, some news agents did stock them, but you never knew when they'd be in, and you never knew. They were usually a couple of years out of date. This was quite exciting for us.
Would they have had all like the old adverts where you could mail away for stuff?
Yeah, they had adverts for all, these extraordinary things called Tootsie Rolls and sweets you couldn't get anywhere other than at this US Air Force Base. So that was a buzz, and that introduced my brother and I to American comics. Our favorites at that time were the Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Justice League comics, which were just coming into their own, were just sort of being reimagined for the 1950s. Because, Superman and Batman had been created back in the 30s. And by the 50s, they needed to sort of dust down and were going in a slightly different direction to the way they'd been. So it was a good time to jump on board.
Was you the envy of your friends because you was able to get those comics?
I don't remember ever being the envy of my friends about anything, really. Must ask my friends why they weren't more envious of me. I don't think, but I probably didn't let them know. I pretty much kept to myself at school and was glad to escape my friends by going into this beautiful Victorian world that we lived in this Victorian old house. So I was quite happy in my own, with my family, and didn't really do much outside of it, with school friends and so on. I guess it was because I was probably more on a level with my brother, who was 5 years older than me. So I was more into the things he was, whereas my friends were, quite rightly, 5 years younger. So I guess it was something like that. Either that, or I just preferred escaping into my own world anyway.
You've got some prints of the Beatles behind you. What do you remember about the explosion in popularity of the Beatles in your home city?
Well, of course, it was the right place to be, wasn't it? Growing up in Liverpool. For some reason, I missed the first release, Love Me Do. I don't remember hearing that at the time it was released, but I do remember hearing for the very first time on the radio, Please Please Me. And it was January the 22nd, 1963. And it's ingrained in my heart, really. And it was the coldest winter ever. It started snowing, I think, on Boxing Day, and it continued snowing until April 63. It was something like that. The whole country came to a standstill, which was great as a kid. I mean, this was just what you want. We should do this every year. And I'd been out playing in the snow on January the 22nd and having a ball. And I came in, and suddenly this extraordinary song came through the wireless, Please Please Me. And I just remember stopping in my tracks. And I remember thinking, whoever these guys are, I bet they're dressed like me. And I was dressed in my tat, because I was dressed in torn jeans and a baggy old sweater that had holes in it, because I'd been out playing in the snow. So you use the attack clothes for that. And it was, listening to it made me want to know who they were, what they were, where they were from. Little did I know they were from Liverpool. But it was an instant love at first hearing. And over the next few weeks, I discovered more and more about them and was blown away to find that they came from Liverpool. And then was shocked when I saw the first photo of them, because they were wearing suits. And I thought that was really strange. Little knowing that I had heard the real Beatles, really, because, they were put in suits by their manager, quite rightly, because he had, a smart idea to get them on TV and so on, and they wouldn't have got on TV if they'd been dressed like me at that time. But it's interesting that the true Beatles sound hit me, and I guess what they were. That love just grew through that year. I needed more and more. I started collecting pictures of them, and bubblegum cards came out. So much happened in 1963.
Who was your guy in the Beatles?
Who's my guy? All four. Absolutely all four. They were as one. Never has there been a foursome like it, I don't think. Just adored them all for different reasons, and still do. Love the sound, whether it's the drums, Nobody drums like Ringo. Bass that Paul plays, that nobody plays bass like him. Just hearing that music for the first time, and it little knowing that we were on a trip that would last till 1970, and that, it would just get more and more. It didn't seem possible that it could be more exciting than it was at that moment with Please Please Me. But it got more and more exciting the further it went. But, Please Please Me still does it for me. Just astonishingly good. It's classic. It's like Dickens. It's like Shakespeare. It's like, timeless.
Didn't you get to see them live?
I did get to see them live. My mother recognizing my infatuation and passion, and my brother was also in on it. So we were able to buy the records as they started coming out, even the LPs, which were 32 and 6.
What was the demand like for it in Liverpool? As in, could you go into a shop and it's like, oh, they've sold out again? They've sold out again? Or was they stocked to the rafters?
They did sell out, but, the people of Liverpool knew to bring enough copies in. And, the fact that it just got bigger and bigger, but, it all started in Liverpool. So they were well aware of the demand. We bought our records from Nems, which was Brian Epstein's shop, which was just opposite our favourite bookshop, Phillipson and Nephews, on Whitechapel in Liverpool. You just cross the road, you've got the best record shop ever, and you've got the best bookshop ever, Phillipson and Nephews. It was heady times for this kid. And by the summer of 63, my mum bought tickets for my brother and my cousin to go and see them live when they played just up coast in Southport at what is now a Sainsbury's supermarket.
Wow.
And I've been in that supermarket, and I can figure out I was sitting in the canned goods aisle and the Beatles were playing in the dog food aisle.
Brilliant.
So it should really have just been covered in gold from the moment that we saw them there. And it was, people say, was it as good as everybody says? It was so much better. It was a glorious day. And not only the Beatles, but we saw Jerry and the Pacemakers were on the same bill, and the Foremost, and Cilla Black and Billy J. Kramer. So it was a real Brian Epstein show that he put together.
What was the split, male and female? Was it 99% female, 1% male?
I didn't notice, to be honest. I didn't notice. I guess I was so intent on watching the show. My only memory of the audience that first time, which was August the 26th, 1963, 6:30 show, Row G. My main memory is that I was shouting for Ringo. Ringo, Ringo, Ringo. Everybody was shouting for something. Eventually, this girl in front of me turned around and she said, "Shut up!" And I can only assume she was a Pete Best fan, disgruntled, that Pete had left the band. Because why she should have chosen to tell me to shut up rather than turning to the whole audience and say, "Shut up, we're trying to listen." But even that is now a happy memory.
Something you've mentioned, which I think is quite interesting. Liverpool, I would imagine, it's got a very hard-working, working-class attitude, perhaps very much in that you go to work where your dad worked type of thing, provide for your family. But you said because of everything that was happening in the city with things like the Beatles, it gave you belief that you could go on to do something different.
Yeah, well, it wasn't just the Beatles. There was this explosion of creativity that was taken up, I think, all around the world as well. But, it really started I think it started in Liverpool. I mean, it just did. And it was musicians, of course, and actors and writers, every other form of the arts were doing extraordinary things. So you were very aware of that. I mean, as soon as I got out of school, when I came away from my school, because my school certainly wasn't accepting of any of this. By May of 1963, they sent letters home saying nobody must come to school with a Beatle haircut. Beatle haircut at that time was, you would say, look how short their hair is now. But of course, at that time, it did look quite extraordinary. And needless to say, with my mop, I wanted a Beatle haircut, desperately trying to get rid of the curls and flatten it. But the school would not have that. They were not going to have that. And the school was, it was very Victorian, going on medieval. Yet outside of the school, there was this wonderful, extraordinary thing happening that you tuned into as a young person. And you recognize that, well, this is for me. What they're saying at school is definitely not for me. I mean, there were a couple of teachers at the school who were, I would say, inspirational and, always lucky to have people like that. And they introduced me to a lot of things. But the general way the school was thinking from management was pretty grim. and nothing to do with the 1960s. That's for sure.
What was the juxtaposition with your family? How did they feel about it? Was they seeing it the academic route, or could they see your artistic?
I think both mum and dad just, there was a feeling you got to get a job at some point. But, if you can get a job that you enjoy doing, well, good luck getting that. That would be tremendous. I mean, they'd grown up through the Second World War and the horrendous time after the Second World War when there simply wasn't any money anywhere in Britain. The Second World War lasted a lot longer than 1945. The effects of it went on, certainly in Liverpool. When I was growing up in the 50s, there was still bomb sites across the city. The rebuilding hadn't started. There just wasn't any money, so it took quite a long time. And I remember by the time Harold Macmillan suggested that we've never had it so good, my dad and my grandfather exploded at that. They thought, we've never had it this good. Of course, he was probably right at the time now, looking back, probably what he should have said is you'll never have it this good again, because there were exciting things happening towards the start of the 60s. But, you see that in hindsight rather than when you're stuck there trying to make ends meet. So mum and dad they probably would have preferred me to go the academic route, but they recognized that that wasn't in my makeup. That wasn't going to happen. Luckily, they had my elder brother who was more academic. And so they pinned their hopes on him, I think. And that didn't turn out too well, because by the time the Beatles were heading off to India in search of themselves, my brother thought that's a good idea and quit teacher training college to travel to India on foot at the end of the 60s. Again, no mean feat to do that and find himself. And, he's been off on cloud nine ever since, really. But, he did find himself. And I think that's, life is all about that, figuring out who the heck you are and what you can bring to the party. So, yeah, I think they came to terms with their three sons in the end.
Because at 16, you'd leave Liverpool and yet headed to Blackpool to work at the Blackpool Tower Circus.
I did. Well, that was on a whim. And it was because it was the end of the 60s and we did things on a whim then. And, I left school not having a clue how to get into comic books, which was an obvious thing that I should do because I love them so much. By that time, my walls were all covered with comic strips that I'd drawn and written. But on a whim, I just went up to Blackpool Tower Circus because I remembered one of my teachers doing this thing to me. He said, "You're a clown, Quinn, you're a clown. What are you?" And I had to say, "I'm a clown, sir, I'm a clown." And he did this every time he'd come in the classroom. To this day, I don't know why. That makes you think I must have been the class clown, joking. And I wasn't. I was this kid at the back of the class who just looked out the window and wished I was out there, in the world, rather than sitting in a classroom. So I thought, well, that would be quite funny if I could get a job in the circus. So I got the coach up to Blackpool. I'd never been there before, even though it's just a hop and a skip away. And got off the coach, found the tower, and I knew the circus was underneath it, knocked on the stage door. And it was opened by a guy who was the most famous clown on the planet at that time, a guy called Charlie Caroli. And he was in full makeup, so I recognized him from the TV. And he said, "What do you want?" And I said, "Are there any jobs going?" And he stood back and regarded me again. And then he said, "Follow me." And he took me across the circus ring to his dressing room and sat me at his mirror, which was surrounded by these 100-watt light bulbs. So it was very much showbiz. And he got this white slop out, put it on my face, and found a wig, which I hardly needed, fancy clothes. And a day after leaving school, I was a clown at Blackpool Tower Circus.
That's crazy.
It's even crazier. If he hadn't been walking past the stage door when I knocked, if anybody else in that building had answered, they would have said, "I don't know," and I would have been put off and come home. But this gave me this opportunity to walk into this extraordinary world of circus. Everybody there was from Eastern Europe. Tightrope walkers and what have you, lion tamers and all sorts. I mean, this was old-time circus. And my job was to run into the ring with the clowns and throw buckets of water at them and make sure I missed, which I did. And so I was there for a season, at the end of which Charlie Caroli came up to me and he said, "So, do you know who you are yet?" And I said, "I know I'm not a clown." And he patted me on the back. He said, "Well spotted." Because a clown is something glorious, there's a lot of people who say, "Oh, look, I'm a clown. I've got the red nose and the whatever." No, you're just an arse. A clown is something I think you have to be born to be. and like Charlie Chaplin and Charlie Caroli and Stan Laurel and Ken Dodd. These are extraordinary beings. I didn't have that, that's for sure. So he said, well, look, I'm going into pantomime at a place called Leeds, at a beautiful old theatre there. Why don't you see if you can get a job there?
What did he see in you then? If you're saying you wasn't a clown, what did he just like your work ethic?
I didn't have what it takes. There was Charlie and two other clowns. That was his main troupe. There was Paul and Jimmy. They each brought something different to what they did as a trio. And they were each of them quite brilliant at what they did. I was just somebody in a silly wig and white face and fancy costume throwing water.
But he must have seen something in you to say like, okay, this isn't working out. Come with me to Leeds and let's see if we can find you something in this area.
Well, what he suggested was that I might be able to get a job as a stagehand there. So which it wasn't that he wanted me in his troupe anymore. That's for sure. He recognised that I didn't bring much to, but it was sweet of him to actually look after this 16-year-old, very innocent schoolboy as I was. So I'm very thankful to him, and I'm particularly thankful that he suggested going to Leeds, because I found myself at this beautiful old Victorian theatre. And that is truly where I found myself.
And there was another chance meeting there, right, with Ronnie Corbett?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a chance meeting with everybody who was big at that time, really, in the world of light entertainment, because the BBC were there every week filming a TV series called The Good Old Days. It was a smallish theatre, so backstage was cramped. So you were literally rubbing shoulders with these great artists, and they were very sweet people. They were very nice people. I can't think of one of them that I'd describe as a stinker.
Did you ever get starstruck?
Yeah, I got starstruck when I was walking down the stairs from the Flies one day, and sitting in the green room at the bottom of the staircase was Eartha Kitt. And as I walked down the stairs, she spotted me, and her eyes melted into my eyes. I'd just turned 17 at this point, and I'm walking down, and I'm so conscious that Eartha Kitt is looking at me, and not only looking at me, but looking into my soul. And I walked down, and there were 24 stairs that I had to walk down, and it was the most moving experience of my life, probably. And by the time I got to her, she was sitting on a window ledge at the bottom of the stairs. Again, her eyes were just beaming straight into me, and I thought, what do? I didn't even know why the hell I'd come downstairs. And I thought, well, I'll make a cup of tea. And that was across the green room. So I walked across the green room. I could feel her eyes still on me, but I thought, it can't be. So I get a cup out and a tea bag, and I turn around, and the eyes are still on me. And I'm like this, my knees are knocking. It's such an effect this total sex symbol has on me, because that's one of the many things she was.
Yeah.
Whenever I tell this story, I often pause at this moment, and then whoever I'm telling it to says, go on, what happened next? I say, well, what happened next was that she was called on stage to do her act. So she got up and she went on stage. And they say, well, that's not much of an end to the story. But the whole point of this story is that here I am 50 years later recounting this story. And it still has that effect. I can still feel the effect of Eartha Kitt's eyes on me. And I always end this story by saying, and that, Simon Cowell, is true X Factor, because she had it. She had it in spades. She was amazing. And I've still got in this office, I couldn't resist, which sounds a little pervy now. But for God's sake, I'm 17 years of age and it's Eartha Kitt. I went up to her dressing room after she had done her act and she'd taken the dress off and whatever. And I plucked a feather from her Victorian gown, a white feather. And I've kept that ever since, and I've got it still. It's my Eartha Kitt souvenir from that day, a little white feather that was part of her collar when she played the City Varieties musical.
I love that.
Very lucky to meet people like that. And then, of course, one day I'm sitting there, and I remember it's between during rehearsals for The Good Old Days, and I'm writing a letter to my brother who was had gone to Australia by that time. And Ronnie Corbett comes and sits down next to me, and he said, oh, you're a writer.
What a massive star, though, at that time.
Absolutely. I said, I suppose it's the Liverpool boy in me coming out saying, yeah, I'm a writer, yeah. He said, oh, I need scripts. Can you write scripts? I said, sure. He says, well, I'll be back in 2 weeks. can you write some scripts for me by then? So for the next 2 weeks, I wrote at least one script a day. And I had the good sense the day before he was coming back to read them and toss most of them down the toilet. But I kept 2 and I put them in my pocket, folded up, put them in my pocket. And then I remember on the day thinking, well, he won't even remember, But below me, he came up to me and he said, have you got any scripts for me? Which is incredible that he would, he was kind of a busy guy at that point in his career. And I handed them to him and we sat down together backstage and he started reading one, not a titter, not a laugh. And I was immediately covered in sweat because this is Ronnie Corbett sitting there and he doesn't think I'm funny. And then he finished that one, folded it up and started reading the second one, and halfway through it, few lines into it, he started going, ha, 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 ha. And it was identifiable as Ronnie Corbett's laugh, much more than what I just did.
I got it. I got the laugh.
At the end of it, reading it, he reached in his pocket, pulled out a wallet and took out 25 quid and gave it to me. I guess that must have been 1970. And 25 quid was a hell of a lot of money for a script, for just writing something. So I became a professional scriptwriter there and then because, if that doesn't make you a professional writer, I don't know what does.
What was it you was writing? Was it just like a short sketch?
It was a short sketch. More than that, I do not know because I didn't keep a copy. And I have no memory of what it was, which I'm pleased because I'm sure it must have been cack. Whether or not he ever put it on TV, I don't know, or used it in any way. I don't know, or whether he was just being nice. But I don't think he'd be that nice. I don't think he'd just hand 25 quid away, even Ronnie Corbett at that time. So he saw something in it, which made me start approaching other, and I was in the right place to approach comedians because we had them there every week and they all needed material.
Was your confidence through the roof at that point then?
Well, then suddenly, again, it's all about finding yourself, who you are, what you can do, and believing in yourself. And this is the job schools should see as their job, or what the schools should see as their job. Making a child believe in themselves. It's crucial so that when you leave school, no matter what qualifications you've got, when you go for a job, you have to make people believe in you. That has to start by believing in yourself. So, yeah, I absolutely believed in myself. And it started me thinking, well, shortly after that, we had a delivery of 1,000 comics at the theatre from DC Thompson up in Scotland, the Beano, Dandy, Topper and Beezer people. And they had sent 1,000 comics to us to hand out during pantomime time to kids in the audience. And I sat backstage and started reading them thinking, I loved these when I was a kid. I was still a kid. I thought, and I can do this. I know I can do it. So I took a month and chose one character in particular, a character who was in a comic called Sparky at the time called Hungry Horace. And I thought, I'll just do loads and loads of stories about Hungry Horace. So I spent a month doing a story a day. At the end of the month, I did the same thing again, read through them, junked a pile of them, and sent off, I think, 4 stories. And a week later, I got this okay from Dundee saying, we're accepting, here's a check for 2 of the stories, returning 2 of them. But if I'm ever in Dundee, come and see us. So I was on the next bus.
You took them up on that. I'm on my way.
Yeah, I did. That's really where I learned how to do comics. Well, I kind of knew already because I've been doing them since I was 2. But I learned how to churn them out because they had so many weekly comics at that point that if you could hold a pencil and, you were in, you were in.
So was you going in as in almost like 2 jobs, writing the stories and illustrating them? I
was mainly a writer. So I was working with all the illustrators that I'd loved when I was a kid. So that was really exciting. So again, it's script writing. It's, telling the artist what's happening in each picture. And I love that. I love the camaraderie, the working as part of a team, with an editor and an illustrator, and just seeing what they bring to your work, what they, how they bring it to life. But also thinking in a visual way because you want it to work as a page.
Was you coming in a lot younger than those guys then? Because you say it's people you'd grown up reading the comics.
Yeah. Well, I was still really young, yeah. So I was younger than anybody.
How did they feel about that? Was that strange for them? You coming up with the ideas to present to them, or was they just doing the job?
They were just doing the job. Again, it's this element of churning stuff out. Much as I love Thompson's, they weren't the best. They weren't great payers, that's for sure. It was, you had to do a lot to make a living. So you would. And I'm sure the same applied to the editors and writers and illustrators. But that was the beauty of Thompson's, that they had so many comics. So you could do a lot. And not only did they have comics, but they also had newspapers and magazines. And so I was able to branch out and I started writing interviews for magazines, which has been a part of my life as well, and something that I've always enjoyed because I have an interest in people. So it sort of always fascinated me. If I can choose the people that I'm going to interview, then that's great. And, the first person I interviewed was Leslie Judd from Blue Peter. And I was invited up to the Blue Peter office, and that was a buzz because, I'd been a big Blue Peter watcher as a kid.
Part of everybody's DNA at some point, Blue Peter is, I think.
I think so. And Leslie was just great and perfect choice for first interview, because pretty nervous, no matter how much research you've done, whether any of these questions are going to get more than a one-word answer, or whatever. So luckily, I found that kind of came naturally, which came with just having an interest in the people.
Exactly.
And that was a blast. So I started doing a lot of interviews.
When did your relationship with Dickie Howard begin? Because didn't you both meet at a comic convention in the late 70s?
We did, yes.
Much different to the comic conventions nowadays, I would imagine.
It was real old style in that it was mainly British comics related. And there was such a big British comic world at that time. So many British comics still. I think the only concession to America we had was Mad Magazine was there. Oh, and there was some mention of Marvel, because Marvel were making inroads into the UK at that time, reprinting their work. So that's where I met Dickie. I think we were the only two people in the building at the convention who nobody recognised. All the others had been at it for years and years and years and had big names and so on. Anyway, Dickie was doing work for a comic called Whoopee at the time, and he suggested that I approach them, and that was not Thompson's, but that was from IPC, which was the rival comic company who were down in London. So that got me into IPC, who paid a lot better than DC Thompson. And we started working on, first of all, a character called Supermum. And then Dickie was very good at turning work round really fast. So we just started creating new characters all the time and pitching them to anybody and everything. Also magazines, we used to say if a new magazine appeared on the stands, we would get in touch with the editor double quick and say, you know what you need? You need a comic strip. So we have no idea how many comic strips we created in those early years together, but it's hundreds. And we ended up working not only for the UK, but for America as well, with all sorts of strips. I would love to have a collection of them. I mean, I probably have got most of them somewhere all around this house, but I would love them all to be collected in one place because it was such a wild variety of stuff that we were doing.
What clicked between the two of you? With him doing the illustrations, you doing the stories? Did you just have like a really similar sense of humour, or what was it?
I think we're quite different, really, Dickie and I, in so many ways. But he made me laugh and I made him laugh, I guess. So I don't know if our humour was similar, but it blended well together. What he brought to my scripts was fantastic. And I know he thinks the same about my scripts to his work. So something just worked. And I think there was a kind of feel about our strips that you'd either love them or absolutely loathe them. It was different to most of the stuff that was being created at the time. And our big break came when we realised that Marvel were reprinting a lot of work in the UK. And we thought, well, let's give them a buzz and see if they want a funny strip to drop in between the superheroics. Much to my surprise, they said, oh, yeah, give it a go. Can you get us a strip by Friday? And this was like Tuesday. And I said, well, what comic are you putting out? Well, we have a new comic that's been on the stands for a few weeks. The general theme is military and called Forces in Combat. So we went away and we came up with this idea called I Was Adolf Stubble, which was about this little guy back at the start of World War I who just happened to have Hitler's face. And it allowed us to make fun of the whole Third Reich, who were perfectly cast to be drawn by Dickie Howard, because they were such muppets, such arseholes in every way. The fact that they call themselves the master race is so hilarious when you look at Adolf and you look at Goebbels hobbling along, and then you look at Goering rolling along, and then Himmler, everybody's worst nightmare, the little tin-rimmed specs. And then you got subsidiary characters like Lord Haw-Haw. You couldn't, it was such a joke. It was like the Three Stooges plus. So we did that, and it went down a bundle with the editors at Marvel UK. And they started asking for more because at that point, they had about 6 weeklies, and I think it was 4 monthly titles that they were producing specifically for Britain. So we ended up in each one, and our stuff was accepted by the readers, which I thought, oh, they're not going to like this because, they're going to just want the superheroics. They're not going to like British style stuff. But I guess our stuff had enough clout in it to be different to your average funny comic that was out at the time. And it worked. And, that was great for us because, again, it was this whole new area to work in.
Did it feel like work?
It never feels like work. No, I've yet to have a proper job in my life,
Was it just the deadlines?
Well, deadlines are, just a part of it. You miss the deadline, you don't work in comics. It's that simple. You can't miss a deadline. And that's just something that because, if you miss a deadline, then it means the comic will go out late and you've only got X amount of days on the newsstands anyway. If you, lose one of them, that's serious stuff. So, it is a business and you have to be aware of that. So we were just very good at pushing ourselves everywhere. I guess the next big thing in my career was that I fell in love. My wife is an American and she grew up in the same as me in the 50s and 60s, and she fell in love with Britain back when she saw a movie with Hayley Mills called Whistle Down the Wind back in 1961, I think it was. And then when the Beatles hit on the Ed Sullivan Show, she fell in love with the Beatles. And suddenly it was the 1980s and she hadn't got to Great Britain and she had meant to, and she was now 30 and she realised, hang on, I better do something.
I got to find me a Liverpudlian.
Well, it wasn't quite that. She put an advert into a magazine called The Beatles Monthly, The Beatles Book it was called. And the advert read, anybody over in Britain want to swap houses for the summer? And I was working freelance at the time and I thought, well, that would be great because, it's America. So I wrote to her and then she wrote back and I wrote back. And by the third letter, she said, this obviously wasn't about swapping houses for the summer. This was something more. And we continued to write to each other. This was before emails. We were reliant on the post office. And we ended up writing to each other about 5 times a day, sending these letters. And 2 months in, she rang me up and she said, or she said, or I said, something's happening here, isn't it? And either she said or I said, well, I hope so. And so she thought, I better come over. So she came over and we met at Heathrow Airport. And we've been together ever since, really. So she was here for 2 weeks initially, and it was decided that should we live in the UK or the US? And I thought that'd be a blast to come to the US. So I sold up everything and headed off to the US. She was living in a place called Indianapolis. And when I got there, my first week there, I looked in the yellow pages under publisher and found that one of America's most famous publishers were actually in Indianapolis. Place called the Saturday Evening Post magazine, which had originally been created by Benjamin Franklin back in 1728.
Quite a big deal then.
Yeah, quite a big deal. It was most famous in the last century for its writers and illustrators and people like P.G. Wodehouse and F. Scott Fitzgerald and the illustrator Norman Rockwell, who did a lot of the covers. But I knew the magazine myself and I knew that it did have a lot of cartoons in it. So rather amazing, really. I rang them up because the cartoons they had were very sophisticated cartoons. It was a sophisticated magazine. And my stuff was Dandy Beano kind of stuff. No offense to the Dandy or Beano, but, it's never suggested that it's sophisticated. Part of its beauty is that it isn't. So I rang them up and bizarrely I was put through to the publisher rather than the editor. And the publisher, I said, I'm a cartoonist in from England. And she said, oh, well, come in and show me your stuff. And I said, okay, when? And she said, well, now. And I thought, well, that's different. In Britain, it would be, I don't know, maybe next autumn or something. Now, so we rushed across town and I went in and I showed her my portfolio. And she flicked through it, handed it me back. She said, I don't know anything about humour. And boy, that was true as I was to find out. But she said, you're obviously from England. Where are you from? And I said, well, at Liverpool originally. And everything stopped. And she said, you're from Liverpool? She said, how'd you like to start work on Monday? I said, doing what? And she said, oh, you could be our humour editor. You're supposed to be funny from Liverpool, aren't you? So I was given this job just on the fact that I came from Liverpool.
At this point, though, when are you going to take a step back and thinking, I'm having all these chance things. What if you'd have gone to America a week later? That job might not have been in the newspaper.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, no, she was definitely somebody who worked on a whim. So, I never quite figured out what it was. I mean, I can only assume that she loved John, Paul, George and Ringo.
But just all these chance things like meeting the clown in Blackpool, meeting Ronnie Corbett.
My whole life has been a life of serendipity, these moments.
Sliding doors kind of thing.
Very much so. It makes you think. When I came to write my autobiography a few years ago, that was the first time that I realized that everything connected right through to my earliest memory of having a stick of charcoal put in my hands by my mother and being told to go and draw on my bedroom wall. I mean, everything relates to that. If she hadn't done that, and goodness knows why she did that, everything could have been different. So, yeah, absolutely. There was most certainly, call it luck, call it the stars aligning or whatever. Throughout my life, meeting the right people at the right time has been a big part of what I do, right through to meeting Eamon now. And this latest book, I mean, it's, suddenly there's this person who's massive in my life, who we could so easily not have met, but these things happen. They lead to all sorts of extraordinary things. So, yeah, suddenly this resident alien in America was the humor editor at the Saturday Evening Post, which opened up every door in America to me, absolutely every door, because it was such a well-known publication and a well-loved publication. I could reach anybody I wanted to.
People would listen to you because you were approaching them from this well-established...
People would listen to the letterhead that I wrote upon. Yes, I mean, it was brilliant. It was fantastic to be able to have that power, particularly because the first job I was given as humor editor, no less, was to put a book together about AIDS. It was at the start of the AIDS epidemic.
Quite a contrast to your job title.
Just a bit. I saw nothing funny in AIDS, and it was at the time when nobody really knew anything about it other than it was killing a lot of people. A lot of my friends from the theatre years had died abruptly, but I didn't know more than that, and I didn't want to know, so I was one of the ignorant who wanted to remain ignorant. Thank you very much. This is too horrible. I don't want to know anything. So I was able to sit down and think, well, I've got to create a publication that I would read, that I would actually pick up. So that helped. But it was a big leap for me, took me into a different area than any I'd worked in so far. And again, I'm very thankful to have worked on that. And the idea I came up with was to bring in celebrities, which is so obvious now. But at that point in time, no celebrities said anything about AIDS. The only person, I guess, connected to it was Rock Hudson, and that was just because he had it, not because he was spokesperson for it. And I guess I realized that the one thing we could do, because it wasn't like we were going to come up with a cure, but the one thing we could do would be to try and get rid of the stigma attached to the very word AIDS, which was huge, particularly in America, where people were being run out of town who had AIDS.
What year would this have been, Tim? Was this like early, mid-80s?
Early 80s. So there were stories in the papers about people being run out of town and having their windows smashed, and just hideous, the worst kind of humanity, lack of humanity. So I thought if we could get rid of that stigma, it gave me a starting point. And I thought we could do that if enough celebrities come in on this to show that they don't mind having their names attached to the word AIDS. I just started writing out to as many celebrities' addresses as I could get, asking them to send me anything. It didn't have to be AIDS related. It could be anything. It could be an old school essay. It could be a photograph. It could be a poem. It could be absolutely anything, just so I could use their name and whatever they send me. And at the bottom of each page or the top of each page, put a simple AIDS fact, like you can't catch AIDS by hugging somebody.
Just kind of dismiss the stigma.
Basic stuff, or what is now very basic stuff. But back then, there wasn't anything like it. So the first person to come on board was Yoko Ono, who at that time was well-loved because John had died not long before. And so she was going through probably the only time in her life where she was beloved by everybody who felt sorry for her. She came in, and once I had her name, that allowed me to go to the LA Times, and they ended up doing a front page story about what I was trying to do and that I was seeking. And before I knew it, I had 100 major celebrities knocking at my door saying, we want to do something with you. What can we do? What can we send? Will this do? Will this do? It was everybody from Jane Fonda to the cast of Cheers, which was the biggest TV show at the time, Gene Wilder, Dan Aykroyd, huge names. And it was an incredibly moving thing to work on. And one of the people that I wrote to was Stan Lee. And he immediately got back in touch and said that he will use his creation, Spider-Man, to say something about AIDS. I mean, how big was that? And once I had him, I went to DC, told them that Stan's doing Spider-Man. And they said, well, we'll do Superman.
How was this all presented, Tim? Was it a book?
It was a book called, the rather bizarre title, The Celebrity AIDS Book, which But what are you going to call something like that, And I wanted it in the title, and I wanted what it was in the title. So that's what we came up with.
Wasn't Stanley familiar with your name or some work?
He was, yeah. Well, we had many phone calls at that point, and turned out one of the things I was doing was a comic strip back in Britain that ran in the Daily Mirror called Jane, which, funnily enough, was the name of my wife. It had run originally from the 1930s to the end of the 50s, but it had been brought back in the 80s. How to describe it? It was about this bright young girl who had this habit of losing her clothes twice a week. So a very strange thing. And none of my American friends could figure out how this could be appearing in a family newspaper. But it was, I don't think it would go down well today. I think, people would be up in arms if the Mirror tried to resurrect it. But it was strangely innocent and nice. Naughty but nice, I guess, is how one could describe it. And anyway, it turned out that Stan knew of the Jane strip, and he said, I love that strip. I think it's fantastic. And the reason he knew was he knew a lot about Britain because his wife was British. So he had sort of an in over here as well. But that blew me away because Stan had been my hero since I was 7, when I first started recognizing his name. It was before he was doing superheroes, before he created the Fantastic Four and so on, when he was doing monster titles, comics and things, and sort of Outer Limits kind of Twilight Zone kind of comic books.
How did that lead to an actual job then with Marvel? Did you have the balls to say, you got any jobs, or did he suggest something to you?
Well, not at that time, because I was kind of happy, and in a way, the Saturday Evening Post was as big as you can get. So to have lucked into that was quite something. But I was there for about 5 years, and after that, I began to feel a bit stale, and it was kind of a right-wing place. I don't mean that. I don't mean horribly right-wing, but more right-wing than me. Not that I'm political in any way. I think they're all balmy, but certainly I'm more left-inclined than right-inclined. That's for sure. As suits somebody coming from Liverpool, I guess. So after 5 years, I'd felt I'd sort of done my bit with them, and happened to be speaking to Stan and on the phone, and said, anything happening at Marvel? And he said, when can you be here? I think I was there before he put the phone down.
So it was a total relocate to New York, was it?
Yeah. Well, they had a lot of stuff going on. They were trying to refresh the look of Marvel Comics. And to do that, they were bringing in a lot of British artists to give the characters a fresh look. And at that point, even though they'd been reprinting stuff in the UK for a long time, they now started doing new stuff from the UK, actually originated in the UK. So we had this office where Fleet Street meets the Strand, a Marvel office, and we had the office in New York City, and the two were so solidly connected at this point. So I was leaping between the two. I became an editor, but I think my happiest time was when I became the head of special projects, because nobody knew what the hell I was working on. It's like, what are you working on? A special project. And Marvel probably opened all the doors that the Saturday Evening Post hadn't, any that were left. And I found that I was really good at promoting the company at that point, which sounds a bit weird today when the last thing they need is promotion, but we needed it then. So I started getting a lot of TV work, getting us onto kids shows and all sorts, but also developing ideas. Like there was a 50-episode cliffhanger radio drama series that I convinced the BBC to do, featuring Spider-Man. And we brought in Dirk Maggs, who was the producer of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And he'd done a Superman and a Batman drama series for Radio 1. And he and I ended up getting on very well. And we worked on this Spider-Man thing together, which I edited. And I suggested that what we needed was a theme tune for it. So I brought in Brian May. I contacted Brian May and said, would you do the theme tune? And he said, you bet. He was blown away by the idea. I knew that he had done the work on Flash Gordon, the movie. And I thought, well, that's the kind of pizzazzy kind of thing we need for Spider-Man.
It did Starfleet as well. I don't know if you remember Starfleet.
Oh, really? Okay. I mean, he's sensational and beautiful guy to work with. I'd still think to this day that his Spider-Man theme is the best. And all you have to do if you want to hear it is Google Spider-Man Brian May theme. It's up there on YouTube, and it is sensational. So that was one of the special projects that I produced. And another was I approached Melvin Bragg at the South Bank show to do the history of Marvel Comics. I said, it really is connected to American society from the 1930s through to what was then the present in the 80s. And to my surprise, he said, yeah, let's do it. Come and see me when you're in London next. So I went to see him, and he said, well, we really want to do it, but none of my producers know anything about comics. So will you produce it yourself? So again, as a typical Liverpudlian, I said, yeah, sure. And I remember walking out of his office thinking, how the hell do you produce a South Bank show? But by that time, I'd put so many magazines and comic books together. It's exactly the same thing. It's telling the story in the right order. And Melvin gave me massive budget, and he gave me a film crew who were the best film crew on the planet, So they made it. I knew the story back to front. I knew who I wanted to interview, one of the people being Stan Lee, of course.
Was you still in regular contact with Stan?
Yeah, I mean, if I was doing stuff for Marvel UK and I wanted a letter to go in the comic from Stan Lee, I'd write to him and say, can you do blah, blah, blah. And he would always write back to me in the same way saying, here's what I've put together. If it's no good, let me know and I'll try again. I was going to tell Stan, that's no good, Stan, you'll have to do better. Of course, I never had to tell Stan that because it was always perfect. He was just brilliant. So I end up one day with this wonderful thing, thanks to being Marvel's head of special projects, where I'm sitting opposite Stan and asking him any questions that I want, with the film crew around me. And, that was just a total blast. Before we went into the interview, he said, you do realize I can only remember things from the last 5 minutes. But needless to say, as soon as I asked him how it all started, he was off and running from the 1930s to the present day, telling it as only he could.
What do you take away most from your time working with him?
Absolute love. It's love, because I loved him when I was a kid, age 7. And, they often say you shouldn't meet your heroes. And, they're quite right in some cases, that's for sure. But Stan was someone else. Final piece of work he did for me, because I was back in the UK by this time, and I was working with a local charity in Liverpool called Liverpool Heartbeat. And he knew that I went into schools and did workshops and basically encouraged children to believe in themselves as writers and illustrators. And he said, next magazine you're putting together for that, because I put magazines, comics together as literacy projects for Merseyside schools. He said, next time you're putting one together, let me know. Can I have a page in it? Let
me think about it, Stan. Let's see if I can move some things around.
Exactly. So he wrote a poem called How to Be a Superhero. And that's the last thing he wrote. It's for the children of Merseyside. But, seriously, it's for children everywhere. And it basically explains how we can all be superheroes. We don't need to be bitten by radioactive grape just by holding out a hand to people who are in need.
Which is kind of like an underlying theme with everything. It has all like the superhero elements to his stories, but there's always that kind of underlying realism to it.
Yeah. For me, the best thing Marvel ever did was the work Stan Lee produced in the 60s. And his heroes were nice people. And, I get that. That's surely what we're all attempting to be. It's not that difficult, but it's kind of superheroic. And to care and to make the world a better place in whatever way you can and however you can, and we all can by using whatever limited talents we might have. So there you go. Yeah, so it stands out in my life along with the Beatles. And I think similar talents, really, and similar timescale. His best work was done through the 60s, from 61 through to 1970. Same with the Beatles, really. The Beatles are the soundtrack for the Marvel comics.
Now your life's been put into art in a new book called Confessions of a Superhero. Is this a chance for you to look back and think, blimey, you can see it all condensed into one thing?
Well, it's different to that, because a few years ago I wrote my autobiography, and that sort of condensed it all into, a book. This is something so much more than an autobiography or a biography. It's turning somebody's life into a work of art. And I've never seen a book like it. Well, I have, in that it's one of a series of books. But it's most beautifully done. It's a bit like hearing the Beatles for the first time when this fell in my hands. And the fact that it's about myself is almost immaterial. Of course, it's not to me because my ego shines happily. But to come across an artistic talent like this is wonderful, to, find somebody who works in such a different way. And I've worked with a lot of illustrators and artists in my time, but I've never worked with anybody like this. So it's extraordinary. And it does tell quite a tale because, not only is it about my time at Marvel Comics or whatever, it's my tale of grappling with life from the 1950s to today, and that's history. I mean, that's, even my grandparents and parents get a page or two because they had massive impact and effect on me, and to this day, and their story is in there. As if you're lucky enough to have such relations, they're with you for life, right? No matter the short span of time they might spend on the planet with you.
It's a wonderful document to see it all come together and the way it's presented.
It really is. I mean, it should be on every bookshelf, and I'm not saying that as a salesman, I'm saying that as an artist. It's an inspiring piece of work. I'm excited by it every time I see it. I mean, I only got it in my hands 2 weeks ago. It's not been far from me ever since. It was lovely when we met just the other week at where we launched it at Liverpool Comic Con, to see people of all ages recognizing its value and worth and picking it up. And because initially I was like, well, how do I talk about this to say it to my life? Because it's something so much more than that. It's a work of art. Is it a comic book? Yes, but it's so much more than a comic book. Is it a graphic novel? It's more than that. It's keeps coming down to that phrase. It's a work of art.
Thanks ever so much, Tim. There's a lot to unpack, and I'm sure I only scraped little bits of it.
That is true.
Yeah.
This is true. There is, I have done a few other things, but you have more than enough.
Thanks so much to Tim Quinn for sharing some of his incredible journey with me here on the Straight to Video podcast. I hope you enjoyed it and consider checking out his book Confessions of a Superhero by Imon Kakai Lazelle, which is out now through Moochin' About. It really is a spectacular book in both story and design and will make a great Christmas gift for anyone you know who loves Marvel Comics, but you want to get them something a little bit different. Also, don't forget you can catch up with close to 150 more episodes of this show over at stvpod.com, and please continue to share on social media, but also follow wherever you listen to podcasts to make sure you don't miss a single episode. So that's all for today's show. Hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to chatting with you all again real soon.